Feels like Sunday now, don't it? Yeah, thank you, choir. What a way to start our worship service. Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City. It is a joy to see each and every one of you today. If you are visiting with us today, you're our honored guest. We are so glad you're here. Now, you've chosen to attend our service on one of those days when the message may sound like it's really tailored for those who've been with us for a while. Nevertheless, I want you to know that you are welcome among us, and I do think there'll be something in it for you. I hope that you'll hear this message and be inspired by a faith community that looks to the future boldly and deliberately, with an eye toward its place in society and the relationships that make it strong. Our chalice lighting this morning is by the Reverend Dr. Bill Schultz. This is the mission of our faith: to teach the fragile art of hospitality, to revere both the critical mind and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to witness to all that we must hold the whole world in our hands. It's a beautiful day outside. Look at it. I love this weather. I love rainy days. I knew when I moved here from Alabama that I was going to miss rainy days, and it's turned out to be true. On the rare occasions when it rains here, I want nothing more than to stay home, curled up with a good book and something warm to drink, and to listen to that glorious natural white noise. Now, back home in Alabama, rain was not always as sweet and enjoyable as this. Alabama is prone to tornadoes, often deadly ones. I grew accustomed to the siren test every Wednesday at noon. It was an institution there. It was predictable, and it made us feel safe because we knew that someone was in charge. And if the big one hit tomorrow, at least we'd have a warning. When the weather in Alabama gets dangerous, native Alabamians know to turn the dial to the local ABC affiliate and their legendary meteorologist, James Spann. Has anybody heard of James Spann? No? Just an East Coast thing, I guess. Spann has been the TV weatherman since I was a kid, becoming the chief weather anchor on ABC at the age of 23. What makes him famous is his accuracy and his personality. When the weather gets bad, he peels off his blazer, revealing his red suspenders, rolls up his sleeves, and works the map until the threat has passed. Sometimes working around the clock, on the air. The shared wisdom in Alabama is that you know the storm is going to be bad when Spann takes off his jacket. But what really makes Spann an institution in Alabama is that he believes his work saves lives, and it does. And so he's more dedicated than any meteorologist I've ever seen. He knows that in rural Alabama, many people still don't have access to the internet. Many are too far away from town to hear the sirens well, especially if the wind is blowing away from where they are. And he knows that many, many people can only find affordable housing in mobile homes, which are liable to blow off to Oz during a bad storm. And so he works at the map, and people tune in on their TVs or weather radios, holding on to Spann's voice, even when all other hope is lost. Now, when I moved to Utah, tornadoes were no longer a problem. No more hiding in the bathtub wearing your bike helmet. No more weather radio. No more Spann, sadly. But also, now there's a new threat, earthquakes. It was a little unsettling when I signed the lease on my apartment and then was handed an earthquake liability release. I hadn't even thought about earthquakes when I took this job. What the heck, man? You can't hide in the bathtub from an earthquake. But even more importantly, there's no Wednesday siren to reassure me that someone is looking out for this. I mean, in my head, I know that there are plenty of experts watching the seismic activity, but there's nothing that tells my body on a regular schedule that that's happening. And even worse, there's no James Spann to rely on, no channel to tune into when I'm worried about it, no one who represents safety and stability and reassurance. So I just try not to think about earthquakes too much. The thing about institutions is that we don't often think about them when times are easy. If it's your habit to get up and go to church on Sunday, then you probably will. And if it's not your habit, then you probably won't. And as hard as Reverend Tom and David and the choir and I work to make church worth coming out to every single week, there's always going to be an element of routine to it. But that's not a bad thing. There's a reason why faith communities use liturgies to fashion their worship. What feels routine actually becomes the shape of our religious experience. It's like the Wednesday siren. It registers at a level somewhat below active consciousness, yet it's deeply reassuring. things are rocking and rolling along, as they always have, as they always will. It communicates safety and stability and reassurance. And when we switch up the liturgy, as we are doing today, it can feel exciting and challenging. It's a little different today. I think I like it. So then, when the tornado hits, you know that the church is going to be there. The same people who conduct that orderly, predictable liturgy on Sunday morning are going to be there, representing orderliness and safety. And then you'll know that there's at least one thing in your life that isn't spinning and flying. That's part of our job. That's what you hire us for. But it's not just the ministers, is it? Even if one of us got sick and couldn't do church, we know that coffee would still be served. Someone would stand in the narthex and smile at our visitors and help them find a seat. And something would happen during worship. I don't know what, but something would. And when disaster strikes in your life, I sleep well at night knowing that if the need is communicated, the church will come through. I've seen it over and over again. Memorial services that you attend when you didn't even know the deceased, but you know the bereaved, and you don't want them to be alone. Cards and meals to people you've never met, you just know they're going through something, and you've been there yourself. A Kleenex handed across the aisle to a visitor brought to tears by a verse of a hymn, or challenging words spoken in worship, or a moment of vulnerability in a class. I've seen it, and it increases my faith. People are good. They want to help. And when they organize that urge to help into institutions, they magnify their goodness. The church remains even when the minister changes, because the church is not just the minister themselves. The church is the people. Now, I believe that one of the greatest challenges we are facing in society today is the erosion of institutions. An institution can be almost anything as long as it fits this formula: reliability plus relationship. Your monthly book club can be an institution. Or your neighbor who always walks his dog to the coffee shop at precisely 8:30 in the morning and stops to wave at you and wish you good morning. Or the pizza parlor in your neighborhood that's been open since you were a kid. What makes institutions important is that they keep on keeping on, for better or worse, no matter what happens, and they can't function without teamwork, a commonly settled upon vision, and coordinated effort to carry out that vision without a quit date. And democracies absolutely rely upon them because democratic institutions tend to rely not only upon law and statute, but upon social norms to guide behavior. For example, journalism in the public interest was not always an institution that everyday people could rely upon. Changes in libel laws helped steer serious journalism toward reporting only what was factually accurate. And since the decline of yellow journalism and penny tabloids, reliable sources of journalism have relied not only upon these laws, but upon systems for holding one another accountable against the very highest standards of truthfulness, with the understanding that these outlets are guardians of the truth for now and for future generations. The conservative author Yuval Levin argues, and I agree with him, that we trust institutions because they promote internal ethics that make them trustworthy. We trust political institutions, he says, when they take seriously their obligation to the public interest, and when they shape the people who work within them to do the same. We trust the military when it values courage, honor, and duty in carrying out the defense of the nation, and forms people who do too. We trust a university when it is devoted to the search for truth and shapes those within its orbit to pursue that search through learning and teaching. We lose trust in an institution when we no longer believe that it plays this ethical or formative role. In such situations, the institution is revealed to have been corrupted into serving those within it at the expense of its core purpose. This process of the internal corruption of institutions, crucial to the functioning of democracy, is at the heart of the turmoil we see around us, when even the most precious of our democratic values are being assaulted. If we are wise, we recognize that this is not unique to this moment in American history, but frequently poses a challenge to democracies which rise and fall all the time as they respond to the threats. Sociologist Robert Nisbet puts it this way: periodically in Western history, twilight ages make their appearance. Processes of decline and erosion of institutions are more evident than those of genesis and development. Something like a vacuum obtains in the moral order for large numbers of people. Human loyalties, uprooted from accustomed soil, can be seen tumbling across the landscape with no scheme of larger purpose to fix them. Individualism reveals itself less as achievement and enterprise than as egoism and mere performance. Retreat from the major to the minor, from the noble to the trivial, the communal to the personal, and from the objective to the subjective is commonplace. There is a widely expressed sense of degradation of values and of corruption of culture. The sense of estrangement from community is strong. The church, a term that today quite inadequately refers to the richly diverse body of faith institutions from all quarters, is a critical social institution in American society because insofar as it can be independent from the state, it serves as a crucial voice of moral influence and can be a voice of moral dissent. It claims to answer to a higher authority than the authority of the state. Indeed, it draws its authority over the state from the very fact that it answers only to that higher authority. And yet, the biggest news in religion is that churches are declining. At least Christian churches are, and have been for a while now. Younger generations aren't making church part of their routine, partly because they're so busy, for sure, but it's also that deep sense of distrust that Levin talked about, the distrust that churches are living up to their ethical obligations. Widespread clergy sexual abuse, misuse or hoarding of donated funds, moral exclusivity, and failure to keep up with the times are just some of the reasons why people don't trust churches. And then there's the rejection of the core source of authority, that so-called higher power, that for too long has put white, straight, cis, male, and wealthy at the top of the hierarchy and reinforced it here on earth. And to top it all off, the conservative churches have allowed their moral authority to be co-opted by the state rather than maintaining the independence to hold the state morally accountable for its actions. No wonder people don't trust the church. Now, as many of you know, around this time of year, we often celebrate the birthday of our First Unitarian Church in Salt Lake City. And things were really different around here 129 years ago, as you can imagine. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was itself deeply mistrusted and even despised and persecuted by mainstream Christianity and by the federal government. And so the government put a deliberate check on the church, denying the Latter-day Saints the right to establish what they thought would be a theocratic state. Private enterprise provided another check by exploiting the natural resources of the area and building capital resources that could rival the power of the church. State and business brought balance to the dominant religious culture of the Salt Lake Valley, fertilizing it for the growth of ethnic and religious diversity. That is the soil in which our founders planted this congregation. Now, when reading the history of our church, or that of any faith institution really, it's easy to read it as a long procession of ministers, their educational resumes, their erudite sermons or not, their heroic deeds, their salaries for some reason. You really have to read between the lines to see the roles that were played by the laity. But those stories are there. The board members who made difficult decisions in order to keep the lights on and the doors open. The religious educators who preserved and passed on the keys of our faith to new generations and made space for diversity and new ways of engaging the faith. The Unitarian Women's Organization, which for so long kept so many of our churches going through thick and thin. As I read through those histories, I recognize the names of some people who are sitting in our pews even today. On this anniversary of the birthday of the church, our charge is to connect with those ancestors, living and departed, and wonder, what did they stand for? Although the balance of power in the valley may have been on the founders' minds, that can't be all that they wanted for this church. It wouldn't have lasted so long on so flimsy a foundation. No, they wanted liberal religion for its own sake. So valuable and sturdy a heritage they left us. Such immense treasures of faith. There's a lovely line in one of our UU hymns. It's a hymn that's often sung at important junctures in the careers of ministers, at ordinations, installations, and retirement celebrations. And it's always sung at the service of the living tradition. The worship service at our UU National General Assembly in June every year, in which these ministerial transitions are honored. The hymn is called Rank by Rank. And the line I'm thinking of goes like this. Though the path be hard and long, still we strive in expectation. Join we now their ageless song, one with them in aspiration, one in name, in honor one. Guard we well the crown they won. What they dreamed be ours to do. Hope their hopes and seal them true. Or, to put a finer point on it, hear these words from the historian Timothy Snyder, writing about the importance of preserving our institutions in the defense against tyranny. It is institutions that help us to preserve decency. Do not speak of our institutions unless you make them yours by acting on their behalf. Institutions do not protect themselves. They fall one after the other unless each is defended from the beginning. So choose an institution, a court, a newspaper, a law, a labor union, a church, and take its side. Now, over the next few years, we have a unique opportunity to engage in an intentional practice of institutional preservation and rejuvenation. In fact, we are already ankle deep in it. At our annual meeting this past May, our senior minister announced his intention to retire from the ministry at the end of the 2021 church year, capping what will be a 34-year ministry in Salt Lake City and a 45-year career. Now, this is the part where I'm going to break character and say, this might feel weird to talk about, but it's only weird if we make it weird. This service today is not a memorial service, okay? I promised Tom it wouldn't be weird, so it's not going to be weird on my account. Listen, we have one of the most experienced ministers in the whole Unitarian Universalist Association, and frankly, we would be fools to a one if we didn't spend the next year and a half trying to make the most of that relationship. And remember what I said a few weeks ago when I spoke to you about my hero, Fred Rogers. Anything human is mentionable, and anything mentionable is manageable. Healthy institutions talk openly and lovingly about how they are changing, and they plan faithfully for those changes instead of avoiding them. In churches, we do that within the bonds of our shared covenant, our promises to each other for how we will be together. But the larger point is that the church is in a transition that is much larger than the retirement of one minister. You are the church. And all of you find yourselves in a moment when your culture and its institutions are stressed to the maximum. So if we mean to preserve the institution of this church and the church for another 129 years and beyond, it's not enough simply to oppose the state or even to oppose the status quo. We cannot survive the tremors of history by merely knowing what we stand against. We have to know what we stand for. We have to be able to clearly articulate those values, and we have to know how to make them culturally normative in this space. The retirement of a minister and the long transition that will follow gives us a perfect excuse to re-examine all of our assumptions about what the church means in our time. It's something we can do to preserve democracy in a time when even voting seems like too small of an endeavor. For us to be institution builders, let us take Robert Nesbitt's warning and reverse it. Let us advance from the minor to the major, from the trivial to the noble, from the personal to the communal. Let us not be estranged from one another, but let us know and be known. Let us seek both to transform the institution of the church, but also to let ourselves be changed by it. Let us be willing not to get our way all the time, to give in grace and in substance to those of us who need it the most. Let us consider who the church is serving in these times and who the church is meant to serve. Before you can call a minister to serve you, you need to know what it is that you yourselves are called to. I invite you to join me, along with Reverend Tom, your devoted staff, and the Unitarian Universalist Association, which stands ready to journey beside you, into a period of discernment about that calling. Let us embark together upon that sacred journey. Amen.
May
I've only one announcement this morning, which is a good thing because I preached a little longer than I meant to. After I told y'all last week it wouldn't be a long sermon. I guess I had a lot to say. The only announcement that I have is that on February 29th, there will be a public hearing regarding the private prison that I preached to you about last week. They're trying to build that up in Evanston, Wyoming, and we want the whole city to know that it's happening so we can stop it. I don't have a location yet, but the thing is really happening. So as soon as I have the location, I'm going to announce it to you from here. I'll put it in the order of service, and we'll send it out via email so everybody will know where it's going to happen. And that's all I've got. So at this time, our collection will be taken that supports the work and mission of our church. It's a time to greet those next to you, especially our visitors. Please remain standing. Okay, so now we're going to talk nuts and bolts. How does this ministerial transition thing actually work? So here's the basic outline. Nothing much is going to happen the rest of this year. Sometime next year, you'll start to see things happening. Focus groups, similar to those that we held last year called Courageous Conversations, things like that. And in the second half of next year, we will choose an interim minister who will serve our congregation for 2 years after Reverend Tom completes his work. It's during the interim period when a lot of the concrete transition work will happen. And it won't be until the second year of the interim period when we'll actually start the search for a new settled minister. So that's 2023. Okay, we've got a long way to go yet. It's a long process. It gives us lots of time to explore, to work through our feelings, our dreams and hopes, our worries and anxieties, and all the other stuff that comes with this process. Nothing is going to be rushed, and our goal is to communicate things to you early and often, which is why we're starting today, long before you'll actually need any of this information. So one of the most important things about the transition is fostering lay leadership, because in the Unitarian Universalist tradition, the final authority of the church is in the lay people who make up the body of the church. To that end, we've formed a transition team. And at this time, I'd like to introduce to you the first members of the transition team. Co-chairs are Debbie Bieber and Sue Gary, and our other two members are Paul Carpenter and Jessica French. If y'all just wave for now. No, actually, y'all got to get up. Yeah, y'all come on up. Now, this committee has a long road ahead. They'll be working together through Reverend Tom's retirement. Then their role will shift a little bit as they work directly with the interim minister on tasks specific to the interim period. And then they will participate in getting the new settled minister settled. So that's at least 5 years of work ahead. And so it's possible that you may see different people join or leave the team, and that's normal for any team in any congregation over any 5-year period. But this is our starting lineup. So now, the transition team doesn't really have a whole lot of work to do right now. Mainly their job is to answer your questions. To that end, they've built a timeline in Elliott Hall on the far side, and there's a frequently asked questions worksheet. And each one of you can pick up a copy today. So let's try them out and see how they do. Okay, first question, is Tom retiring?
Yes, Tom is retiring.
When's he retiring, Jessica?
In 2021.
2021.
At the end of the church year.
He's still our minister till then, right?
Yes, he is.
100%. Second question, is Reverend Monica going to be our new senior minister?
No, she's not. As she announced during our congregational meeting last May, she gave it serious consideration, but opted to stay in the position she's in as an assistant minister, which I think is a great idea because that'll give us continuity and stability through the transition process.
Okay, I guess the cat's out of the bag, but is Reverend Monica leaving?
Not only no, but hell no.
So, there you go. Here's another question we're hearing a lot. When are we going to start looking for a new minister?
It will be during the period of the transition when we have the transition minister in the second half of that 2 years.
So we got a ways to wait. Yeah. Okay, so it looks like they're doing a good job already. Hey, thank you. Great job. Okay, so you can take your seats for a moment. Now, this is what's really important for me to tell you. What is the transition team not responsible for? The most important thing for you to know is that this is not the team that will select our next settled minister. That's a different team. And the second most important thing is that they are not responsible for making changes to our governance structures or our ministries. Those are duties that we entrust to the ministers and the board of trustees, and that's not going to change. So you can expect things to sail along pretty much the way they have been for the next couple of years. So now, what should we all be doing during this time? So here are some of my practical recommendations for what you can do during the next year and a half. First, spend some time thinking about what you love about this church right now. Think about who you love in this church. Think about the best times you've had here, the times when you really felt like we were making a difference together. Maybe think about when you first joined this congregation, what you've learned since you first came here, and how you've changed as a person. Now, each one of you, where's mine? Should have received a heart that looks like this when you came in. If you didn't, you can raise your hand and an usher will bring you one. What I'd like you to do is take a moment and write on that heart one thing about coming to church that makes your life better right now. It might be a feeling that you get when you're here, or something concrete that you get from participating in one of our many ministries. Write on that heart one thing about coming to this church that makes your life better right now. If you need another moment, take your time, go ahead. But when you've finished, if you'll pass them toward the center aisle, and I'm just going to keep talking while you do this. The second thing you can do is, if you're part of a committee, I want you to spend some time this year or early next year reviewing your committee charter. Does it still express the goals and aims of your committee? Review your committee processes, like the way you take minutes from meetings or the way you make decisions. Do these processes still feel joyous and efficient, or do they feel stuck? There's no need to change anything right now. Just notice. Just make a little mental note and notice together if you can. Third, if you are a leader, spend some time before next summer thinking about the kinds of skills you need to become a better leader. Do you need help learning how to engage conflict creatively or learning to communicate effectively? Do you need to know how to set up a simple volunteer database or email group? Do you need help expressing gratitude or delegating tasks? Next year will be a great time for us to work on all those skills together. Fourth, and maybe most importantly, try something new. Did you realize that we're not just one congregation, but really several congregations all in one? So if you always attend the 11 o'clock service, there's a whole other church at 9 o'clock, right? If your kids are in RE, recognize that there are a lot of adults who have never seen their faces and probably have never seen you either. If you're in a small group ministry, you might know people that don't ever come to church. So one of the most important tasks for us in this time is to begin to get a grasp of the whole church, not just the parts that any one of us participate in, and how one decision affects that whole. And so one way to do that is to try something new. Come to worship at a different time, bring your kids or your grandkids and sit together as a family. Volunteer in childcare, attend a small group or family fun night. Volunteer for sanctuary, or greet the door, or make coffee if it's not your regular practice. And do it with the intention of seeing a side of your church that you've never seen before. Do something that gets you out of your church comfort zone. And get used to that, because we're all going to feel it a lot over the next few years. And remember, that's a good thing. We want that. Healthy, happy, deliberate discomfort. Taking faithful risks together right now. And finally, we must communicate our love and trust to our leaders. So let's do it right now. Have all the hearts made it to one place? Oh, they're on their way. Okay. So as we bring the hearts to the center, we're going to give them to the transition team. Almost. Sorry. Transition team, if y'all will come up to the front, get the hearts. And if you are a leader in this church, if you teach, if you serve on a committee or on the board, or any other type of leadership, I invite you also to rise in body or in spirit. Stand up if you can. And everyone else, please join me in prayer, meditation, or reflection. Spirit of life and love, this congregation has put their hearts into the hands of these lay leaders and symbolically into the hands of all our lay leaders, those serving now and those who are yet to be called into service. Bless them with the wisdom and patience to see things through, the gravity to preserve the memory of all this church has been for the past 129 years, the foresight to imagine what we may yet become. And bless those of us who follow their leadership with the humility to follow them with grace, the courage to speak up when we need to be heard, and the courage to trust these leaders even when we feel anxious about the unknown. May we all be blessed with love for one another and deep love for this church, which belongs to us all. Amen. Now I invite you all to rise in body or in spirit and sing our closing hymn, written by a former minister of this church, number 139. Please be seated. Our closing words are by Reinhold Niebuhr. Nothing worth doing is completed in our lifetime. Therefore, we are saved by hope. Nothing true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history. Therefore, we're saved by faith. Nothing we can do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we are saved by love. what joy. If you can't have fun in church, then where can you have fun? Thank you, David. This is really fun. Friends, the transition committee has a wonderful table set up. They have chocolate bribes to lure you into asking them questions. And you can take a look at their great display too. For now, let's break for coffee and conversation.